Imagine standing alone in the middle of the world's largest desert. No map, no water, no food. The sun above you, merciless. The sands beneath you, endless. And every step you take could either save your life or bury you forever. In 1994, Mauro Prosperi set out to conquer one of the most brutal endurance races on Earth, the Marathon des Sables, a 6-day ultramarathon across the scorching Sahara. But when a sudden sandstorm ripped through the course, Mauro's world was shattered. Lost, disoriented, and utterly alone, he was thrust into a survival battle so extreme it sounded more like legend than fact. Today, we dive deep into the extraordinary true story of Mauro Prosperi, a man who refused to surrender to the desert, to death, or to fate itself. This is not just a story of survival, it's a story of relentless will, impossible choices, and the thin, wavering line between life and oblivion. Welcome to Beneath the Shadows. So thank you for being here. I really want to say I appreciate you checking out the show, whether you're returning and listening to another episode, or you're coming for the first time and checking this one out to see what it's all about. I appreciate you being here, and it means so much to me. It means the world to me, and I really can't express how much I appreciate every one of you that's taking the time to check out the show, to leave a comment, leave a review, leave a rating. Whether you're checking it out on Spotify or Amazon or Apple Podcast or YouTube, wherever you're finding it, I really appreciate you being here. So thank you so much. Thank you for taking a little break with me. I've had a lot going on recently and got to be a little overwhelming. You know, I get in my head a little bit too much, and sometimes I get a little extra down, I guess you could say. I get a little extra not depressed exactly, but a little depressed. And sometimes I just need a little bit of time away from the things that I like to focus on. And I'd been putting so much energy into the show and not seeing the results that I was exactly hoping for. And it was a little discouraging. And I wanted to take a step back and reevaluate exactly how I was doing these shows and the amount of energy I was pouring into it and the results that I was hoping would come from the energy that I was putting into it. And, you know, there's good, there's bad. You got to take the good with the bad. Sometimes things start slow and end up picking up afterwards. And I'm just going to keep pushing forward. Right now, I haven't released an episode in 3 weeks, a little 3-week break. This is going to be the newest episode. I'm going to go back to every other week, and then I would really like to ramp back up to doing a episode every week. And we'll see exactly how that goes, but we're going to tackle this one today. We're going to have a great time with it. I appreciate you being here. If you haven't taken the time, please check out social media. Instagram, there is the main page, and then there is a fan page or a group on Facebook. If you'd like to check that out as well, please check out the Facebook page, the Instagram page, follow on there. There is a Patreon. I haven't been uploading as much there recently, but I will get it up to date soon. And with the break I just took, I haven't gotten the website up yet, but it will be up in the next month or two. Beyond that, I hope you're having a great day. I hope you're having a beautiful time today. I hope you're having a beautiful time today. Hope it's going very well. Hope you're enjoying the show, everything that you've heard so far. Even if this is your first time, this is your first episode, I hope you're loving it, even though it's been such a short amount of time so far. But with that, with everything that we've talked about already, let's dive into the crazy, kind of absurd, and somewhat unbelievable true story behind the survival of Mauro Prosperi. So the Marathon des Sables, it's a French word. It means marathon of the sands in French. It's not just a race, but Sable is S-A-B-L-E-S, and I believe it's Sable. And I didn't look it up, but I'm just going with that for the entirety of the show. It's a brutal 6 to 7 day odyssey across one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. Spanning around 250 kilometers, about 160 miles, the distance of 6 standard marathons. This ultramarathon demands that runners push far beyond the limits of human endurance. One stage alone can stretch an exhausting 80 to 96 kilometers, which is 50 to 60 miles, often under a merciless sun. And yeah, I'll tell you what, that sun is crazy. Obviously, you always hear about the Sahara being hot, but just to think to run marathons out there over a week, run 6 marathons in 6 days, seems kind of fucked up, I'm not going to lie. Every year, in the heart of Morocco's Sahara Desert, competitors lace up for what many call the toughest foot race on the planet. They battle searing temperatures soaring past 120 degrees Fahrenheit, scarce water supplies, violent sandstorms, and landscapes so vast and empty that they seem to swallow hope itself. Here, survival depends not just on strength, but on sheer willpower. The race itself was born from a dream, and a test of human possibility. In 1984, French concert promoter Patrick Bauer set out alone across the Sahara, carrying all his food and water on his back. Over 12 days, he walked 350 kilometers, over 200 miles, without encountering a single soul, village, or oasis. Inspired by that journey, Bauer organized the first Marathon des Sables in 1986. Just 23 runners dared to face the desert that year, with Bernard Gaudin and Christian Plumere, P-L-U-M-E-R-E, Plumere, crossing the finish line as the inaugural champions. Since then, the race has exploded in scale and legend. By 2009, over 1,000 athletes were answering the desert's call annually, and the Solidarité Marathon des Sables, and the Solidarité Marathon des Sables Association was founded to give back, supporting Moroccan children and disadvantaged communities through health, education, and sustainable development initiatives. The spirit of the race has also expanded across the globe. In 2017, new chapters were written with the launch of the Half Marathon des Sables in the Canary Islands and a full Marathon des Sables event across the brutal deserts of Peru. But no matter where the course is drawn, one truth remains. The Marathon des Sables isn't just a race against the clock. It's a race against the desert, and sometimes against yourself. The sun hadn't yet touched the rooftops of Rome when Mauro Prosperi's footsteps echoed through the quiet streets. His breath plumed in the cold dawn air, even in summer. While most of the city still slept, Mauro ran, his legs slicing through the morning fog, his mind clear, focused, and hungry. There was something sacred in the solitude of early miles, something pure in the way the world unfolded before the sunrise. From the time he was born in Rome on July 13th, 1955, Mauro had always been in motion. A restless energy churned inside him, not chaos, but purpose. He was the kind of child who climbed trees to see the sky and raced his friends not for the sake of winning, but to feel the wind push back against him. His mother often said he didn't walk anywhere. He either ran or leapt. Mauro had a steady and easygoing upbringing, focusing much of his time on schooling and helping his parents with household tasks. He had been a modern pentathlete since the age of 7, when he bumped into one of his father's friends who was a coach at the local sports center in Rome. Then, Prosperi began to excel. He joined the state police from school and was picked up by the Fiamma Oro sports section that is ran by the force. In 1984, he represented Italy at the Los Angeles Olympics and the World Championships the year after that. In his late teens, at 19, the wild energy found discipline. Mauro joined the Italian police force as a crowd control police officer and shortly after enlisted in the country's military reserve, serving in the Carabinieri, Italy's national gendarmerie. Throughout these achievements, his physical gifts met a structure that challenged and molded him. Grueling drills and physical tests, Mauro welcomed them all. Pain, he learned, was a teacher, not an enemy. Fatigue was a gatekeeper, and endurance was the key. It wasn't long before traditional sports failed to excite him. He wanted more than just medals. He wanted to test the outer limits of human endurance. That's when he discovered the world of ultramarathons. Not just marathons, but ultra-distance races that chewed through the mountains, deserts, and days. Not cheering crowds, no fanfare, just suffering, survival, and solitude. By his early 30s, Mauro was competing in 100-kilometer races across Europe. He had the build of a man shaped by motion, lean, compact, and unrelenting. His dark eyes revealed a man who didn't fear exhaustion. He danced with it. Still, even as he chased these limits, he never lost sight of home. His wife, Cinzia, 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 was his anchor. They met at a pre-Olympic pentathlon event where Paglaria, Paglaria, I think is her last name, possibly? Where Paglaria worked as an English to Russian language interpreter. Mauro was instantly taken, not just by her beauty, but by the way she saw through him. She understood his need to push boundaries, but she never let him forget where he belonged. Together, they had 3 children, and in their laughter, Mauro found the only thing that could rival the thrill of the finish line. But that thrill never fully vanished. In 1994, a friend of Mauro's described to him an extreme challenge that he thought was perfect for Mauro. It was a race called the Marathon des Sables, a 250-kilometer ultramarathon across the Moroccan Sahara, self-supported, 6 days, and temperatures that could cook a man from the inside out. Most people would hear this and laugh. Mauro heard it and felt his pulse quicken. "You can't be serious," Cinzia said, holding a look that might catch fire. "That's not a race, that's madness." Mauro smiled. "That's why I have to run it." They argued, of course. She feared for his safety. He feared not taking the chance. Eventually, as she always did, she stood by him, even when her heart wavered. She watched him train with the eyes of a woman who had seen her husband do impossible things before, but never in a place so far removed from safety. In the weeks leading up to the race, Mauro ran with a weighted backpack. He practiced eating dry rations. He drank salt water to test his tolerance. He learned how to navigate by the sun and red wind patterns. He trained like a man going to war, not with others, but with the elements themselves. On the morning of his flight to Morocco, he kissed his children goodbye and lingered at the door longer than usual. Cinzia held his gaze, with unspoken worry lingering behind her eyes. Mauro only nodded and said, "I'll see you soon." But neither of them could have known that the desert had other plans. The heat in Morocco hit differently. It didn't just hang in the air, it wrapped around you, seeped into your skin, and pressed against your lungs like a living force. Mauro stepped off the plane and immediately felt it, the weight of the desert. It was dry, unrelenting, and oddly silent, like the air itself was waiting for something to happen. A small crowd of runners gathered at the terminal, all lean, weathered, sun-scorched veterans of pain. There were men and women from all corners of the world. Americans in mirrored glasses, wiry Brits with high-tech gear, silent Frenchmen with military posture. Mauro felt both at home and alone. Language barriers didn't matter. Pain was a shared tongue. The Marathon des Sables wasn't just a race, it was a pilgrimage. Over the next 6 days, runners would cover over 250 kilometers, over 150 miles, through shifting dunes, jagged rocks, salt flats, and barren valleys. Each carried their own food, gear, and sleeping supplies. Water was rationed, and aid stations were sparse and sacred. But yeah, they had stops and checkpoints every day, and there was like 5 checkpoints throughout this entire course. A certain set distance between each checkpoint, And at these checkpoints, they could refill their water and camp out for the night and things of that nature. But there's only a couple of them throughout the whole course, like 5 of them, 4 of them, something like that. There is not a ton of them at all where they got to refill and relax. And that was the day's checkpoint. That was each section of the race. At the end of each section, there was a checkpoint. As they boarded buses to the starting camp, Mauro glanced out the window at the endless horizon of sand. There was something ancient about it, something unknowable. No trees, no roads, just space and silence. It felt less like a place on Earth and more like a forgotten planet. That night, at the base camp, tents were arranged in a circle like a tribe preparing for a storm. Runners checked their packs obsessively. Some tried to make nervous small talk. Others stared at campfires like monks in meditation. Mauro sat quietly, his back against a rock, chewing on a bar of compressed calories and staring at the stars. Out here, the stars were endless, more than he'd ever seen in his life. There were no cities out here to pollute the sky, just infinite above and sand below. It humbled him. In the early morning hours, a race official came by with a clipboard, calling out names and issuing bib numbers. He tucked the number into his chest strap and looked towards the eastern horizon where a thin ribbon of gold began to bloom. At sunrise, the runners, all 80 of them, gathered at the start line, the silence broken only by camera shutters and the soft crunch of shifting sand under their feet. A loudspeaker crackled, and a man's voice called out in French and English, "Welcome to the Marathon des Sables. You are about to begin one of the most difficult races on Earth. Be strong, be wise, and above all, survive." Then the countdown began. 10 seconds, 9 seconds, 8 seconds. Mauro flexed his fingers, checked his shoelaces, and adjusted his pack. His heart was calm. This was what he had trained for. Then the horn sounded, and they were off. The first day was deceptive. The terrain, though harsh, was manageable. The sun hadn't yet become the unforgiving tyrant it would be. Mauro paced himself, conserving energy, letting the adrenaline settle. He passed a few runners, was passed by some others, but never strayed far from his internal rhythm. His breath in, his breath out. Footsteps like a mantra. One step closer, one step stronger. By midday, the heat bore down with cruel intensity. The sand radiated upward like a stove. Every breath felt dry. Sweat evaporated faster than it could fall, leaving skin caked in white dust. Mauro sipped from his water ration carefully, counting each drop like coins. His training kicked in. He slowed when needed. He pushed when it counted. At the first checkpoint, he checked in, refilled his water, and rested briefly under a tattered canopy. He looked around and saw fatigue in the eyes of other runners. Some were already limping. One was vomiting in the sand. This was only the beginning. By sunset, Mauro had completed stage 1. He reached the day's finish line, pitched his sleeping bag beneath a stretch of black canvas, and took stock of his body. No blisters yet, muscles sore but responsive, mind intact. He lay back on the sand, staring up at the infinite sky again. The stars looked closer now, almost touchable. Somewhere, hundreds of miles north, Cinzia was tucking the children into bed. He could almost hear her voice, soft and reassuring. "Your papa's out there in the desert. He's running, but he's thinking of you." Mauro smiled and faded into a deep slumber. The next 2 days would go just as well for Mauro, and by the end of the third day, he found himself in 4th place overall. He didn't know that the desert was already shifting beneath his feet, like a predator preparing to strike. That tomorrow, the sky would darken, and not from nightfall, but from sand. For now, he slept, wrapped in the silence of the Sahara. Morning in the Sahara arrives like a whispered warning. The wind is still, the air deceptively cool, and the sand carries no hint of the brutality to come. Mauro awoke on day 4 with stiffness in his legs and the taste of dust thick on his tongue. His body ached, but his spirit thrummed. Each sunrise in the desert was earned, not given. He brushed a fine layer of sand off his sleeping mat and stood, scanning the horizon. Today would be different. Today was the long stage. Over 81 kilometers, over 50 miles of punishing terrain. The longest and most feared leg of the race. Some would break, some would drop out, and some, Mauro included, had come here for this. Around him, the camp stirred. Quiet movements, minimal talk. The unwritten rule. Save your breath for the trail. Mauro packed deliberately, tightened his backpack, double-checked his rations, adjusted the scarf around his neck. He moved with the confidence of a man who knew suffering but didn't flinch from it. As the sun rose higher, the runners lined up. There was no cheer, no fanfare, just a countdown and then movement. Silent determination rolling across the sand like a wave. The heat built fast. The first few kilometers passed like the early rounds of a fight, measured and watchful. Mauro moved steadily, watching his hydration, pacing himself carefully. He passed a few runners and was passed by a few others, but didn't bother racing anyone but himself. His eyes stayed forward, his thoughts focused. By midday, the terrain had become brutal. Wide salt flats shimmered like pools of water. Jagged rocks threatened to shred shoes and ankles. The heat pressed down with invisible weight, turning every breath into a laborious task. Then, somewhere past the halfway point, it began. At first, it was subtle, a whisper of the wind. Then, a low, rising hum. Mauro stopped, lifting his head. The horizon darkened unnaturally. A wall of sand approached, not with speed, but with inevitability. A sandstorm. He had been warned about these. Everyone had. The desert did this. It turned on you with no warning, no mercy. Most would stop, drop to the ground, cover their faces, and wait. But Mauro Prosperi didn't stop. He couldn't. He feared the storm, but feared stillness more. He heard rumors of runners who had gone to the ground and never came up again. That sand could bury a man in minutes. A shallow dune could become a tomb. So he moved. He kept moving. Step by step, head down, scarf wrapped tight around his face, goggles fogged and nearly useless. He pressed forward into the world gone blind. The wind screamed, carrying particles that stung his skin and stripped away direction. Landmarks vanished, the trail was gone, footprints erased behind him as fast as they were made. He tried to use his compass, but even that felt uncertain. The wind shifted the dunes, turning the landscape into a spinning labyrinth. Still, he walked. He guessed. He hoped. Time twisted inside the storm. An hour, 2 hours, he didn't know. The sun had disappeared. His world had become red and gold and pain. Then, as suddenly as it began, the wind began to ease. Mauro stopped and turned a slow circle. The storm had finally passed. But the world I left behind was different. There were no runners in sight, no checkpoints, no markers, no trail. Just endless, shifting sand. He was alone, truly and completely alone. He wasn't afraid, though, not yet. But he knew, in the pit of his stomach, that something was wrong. The Sahara had redrawn its lines, and Mauro Prosperi had been swallowed whole. The wind was gone, but it had taken everything with it. Mauro stood in a world washed clean of signs. No runners, no checkpoints, no tracks. Just the endless rise and fall of dunes. Rolling hills of gold and beige, identical in every direction. It felt like the inside of a dream that had no end and no exit. He inhaled slowly. His scarf was still tight around his mouth, caked in grit and sweat. He reached for his compass, held it flat in his palm. It pointed east, but even that felt like a guess now. The route should have taken him north-northeast, toward the next checkpoint. But where was anything? He took a deep breath and kept walking. For hours, Mauro marched under the blazing sun, navigating by instinct and memory, dangerous tools in the Sahara. The sand seemed to stretch and loop, endlessly shifting beneath his feet. His legs were beginning to cramp, his water almost gone. Still, he didn't stop. When you are going all out to win, you don't notice anything. I won the Olympics and the World Cups, but I didn't look around me. As a professional, you have to do the race. Full stop. You have to win. Full stop, Prosperi says. In the desert, I learned that it's really important to look around you, to see what is happening, to know the being next to you. Tomorrow, stopping meant fear. Stopping meant uncertainty. He had to believe that the checkpoint was just over the next dune, then the next, then the next. But nothing came. By the time the sun dipped low and turned the sand to copper red, Mauro's thoughts began to flicker in strange ways. He thought that he saw shapes, other runners, race flags, markers, distant tents. But when he blinked, they dissolved like ghosts. Mirages. He read about this. He had trained for this, but training doesn't prepare you for how cruel hope can be when it's paired with exhaustion. Night fell hard. The desert, once burning, turned cold fast. Mauro found a low spot between dunes and used his emergency bivouac sack, an ultralight, foil-lined shelter that offered little warmth but could trap his body heat. He ate a single energy bar, and by this time his water was gone. He rationed well, but the storm had stolen time and direction. And time, in the desert, is not something you can lose and still win. Lying there, Mauro looked up at the stars, millions of them, spread across the black sky like scattered salt. It was stunning, almost peaceful. He thought of Cinzia, of his children. He thought of Rome, of traffic and espresso, and his old track shoes hanging by the door. Then he reminded himself why he was here. This wasn't just a race, it was a vow. To push, to suffer, to endure. To prove something, to himself, to his past, to the universe. "I'm not done," he whispered in the night, lips cracked, eyes burning. And when morning came, he stood up, laced up his shoes, and walked again. He had no map, no trail, no certainty. But he had a compass, and he had his feet. And he had the only thing that the desert hadn't taken, his will. By the third day after the sandstorm, Mauro Prosperi was no longer an athlete. He was a wanderer, a scavenger, a body in motion clinging to purpose. The Sahara had peeled away the layers, the race number, the national flag, the years of training, and left only the core, a man against the world that didn't care whether he lived or died. His mouth was dry beyond words, his lips, cracked and swollen, bled with each movement. When he tried to speak, perhaps to call out for help or to curse the sun, no sound came. His tongue was swollen, his voice was lost. He began scanning the sky more often, praying for signs of aircraft. But there was nothing. Not even vultures. Even death had better places to be. Each morning he woke up weaker, but still moving. The compass, his only tether to direction, felt increasingly futile. He had no way to know if he was correcting his path or spiraling further into nowhere. He rationed his last sips of water like they were prayers, short, sacred moments of relief. And yeah, he had just a tiny bit left. He also peed in one of his containers because his grandfather had told him during the First World War that when he and other soldiers were stuck places, that they would have to pee into their canteens to, survive pretty much, to have something to drink, that since they didn't have water, they didn't have rations, they had nothing, that they had to use their urine. So one of the first things Mauro did was pee into his extra water bottle canteen that he had. By the late afternoon on the fourth day, the heat had become unbearable. He stumbled from one dune to the next, hallucinating shapes in the sand, trees, lakes, even figures waving at him. But they were always gone by the time he reached them. Then he saw something different. A building. Low, square, real. His vision blurred, but when he blinked, it remained. It didn't move, it didn't shimmer. With the last of his strength, Mauro ran, stumbling, falling, crawling towards it. It was an abandoned Muslim marabout shrine, made of stone and half buried in the drifting sand. A single room, windowless, with remnants of dried plants and bird droppings inside. But to Mauro, it was a palace, shelter, safety. He collapsed inside, too weak to celebrate. Here, at least, he could escape the wind. He pulled the emergency foil blanket around his shoulders and slept. When he woke, he did something he hadn't done in days. He cried. Not for pity, not even for fear, but for release. Then came the hardest truth. He had no water left and no food. Mauro scoured the tiny shelter and its surroundings. He found nothing edible, no trace of travelers, no supplies, just dust and silence. But he did find life. Bats. They were nestled in the shrine's shadowy crevices. He watched them flutter and disappear each night. At first, he only observed them. Then, on the edge of madness and starvation, he took action. He caught one of them with his bare hands. Gritty, fast, brutal. He killed it. He cut off its head, and he mushed up its insides with a knife, drank its blood, and ate what little flesh it had. He explained to the Independent, I decided to drink their blood. I grabbed a handful of bats, cut off their heads, and mushed up their insides with a knife, then sucked them out. I ate at least 20 of them raw. I only did what they did to their prey. He did this again the next day, and then the next. 7 bats in total that day. The taste was vile, metallic, but it kept him alive. For water, he turned to desperation. He urinated in a small tin he carried and let it sit. As the ammonia evaporated, he tried sipping what was left. It was disgusting, but his body was past dignity. It was past anything but instinct. Inside the shrine, he carved the words into the stone walls. I am Mauro Prosperi, Italian. I came here to race the Marathon des Sables. If I die, tell my wife and children that I love them. And still, each morning, he rose. He wrapped himself against the sun. He stepped into the open desert. Not moving towards victory, not moving towards a finish line, but towards life, however far, however impossible it might be. Mauro Prosperi had survived longer than reason allowed. Each day in the shrine, he grew weaker. His limbs, once the machines of a champion, now trembled at the slightest movement. His stomach ached from emptiness. His mind drifted, slipping in and out of strange, half-dreamed memories. The bats had sustained him for a while, but they began to vanish. His body, once a temple of strength and endurance, had become something smaller, something frail, betrayed by time and the brutal indifference of the desert. Mauro had made a promise to himself. He would not die sitting still. But now, in the quiet of the abandoned shrine, with no rescue in sight, another thought crept in. Maybe it was better to choose the end rather than wait for it. He considered his options carefully, with a clarity that surprised him. He didn't feel fear, only a heavy sadness, like the slow falling of a sand through an hourglass. He found a sharp rock near the shrine's entrance, weathered but jagged enough. Sitting cross-legged on the stone floor, Mauro pulled the blade of a Swiss Army knife from his pack. The knife had become a lifeline during his survival, and now it would serve another purpose. He sharpened the blade carefully, methodically, as if preparing for surgery. He knelt, head bowed. He thought of Cinzia. He thought of his children. He thought of Rome. He whispered a prayer, half Italian Catholic, half personal wish, that if there was something, anything beyond this life, it would be kind. Then Mauro raised the blade to his wrist. The first cut was shallow, a test. The second, a touch deeper. But the blood that came was not the healthy, red river he expected. It was thick, slow, sluggish, like syrup. His body was so drained, so starved of water, that even death itself resisted. Mauro dropped the knife and sagged backwards, staring up at the cracked ceiling of the shrine. He figured he would still bleed out throughout the night, so he slowly drifted into what he had hoped would be his final night alive. The sun rose the following day, casting a looming shadow from the shrine onto the surrounding landscape. The miraculous part, Mauro arose as well. A dry laugh escaped his cracked lips, a sound without humor. The desert had denied him everything, even the dignity of a clean exit. At that moment, something shifted inside of him. Maybe it was stubbornness, maybe it was instinct, maybe it was the simple, primal surge that says, not yet. Mauro realized he didn't want to die here. Not like this, not buried nameless in an ocean of sand. If death wanted him, it would have to chase him, engulf him, consume him entirely. He wiped his wrist on his torn shirt, gritted his teeth, and stood up, wavering but upright. With what little strength remained, he staggered out of the shrine and into the punishing sun. He would move. He would keep moving until his legs gave out or salvation found him. Mauro Prosperi was not finished yet. The shrine shrank behind him, a fading dot swallowed by the dunes. Mauro stumbled forward under the ruthless Sahara sun, the sand swallowing his footsteps as quickly as he made them. His body moved because it had to, not because it was ready, not because it was able. Something deep inside, a small flickering voice kept whispering, "One more step. One more step." His skin burned under layers of makeshift cloth. His eyes, bloodshot and raw, squinted against the shimmering air. His shoes, once built for marathons, were in tatters, barely shielding his blistered feet from the scalding ground. Sometimes, Mauro thought he could hear voices, snatches of Italian, laughter, the clink of water glasses, but when he turned his head, there was always nothing, only the eternal silence of the dunes. At night, the cold cut through him like knives. He curled into the folds of the sand, conserving every shred of heat. He sucked moisture from his emergency blanket, desperate for even a trace of dampness. On the second day after leaving the shrine, Mauro realized his body was beginning to turn on itself. His muscles cramped, his mind drifted in and out of lucidity. He dreamed of fountains and rainy Roman afternoons, but woke with his tongue glued to the top of his mouth. But still, he moved. The landscape changed subtly. Small clusters of hardy desert plants appeared, barely alive. Scrubby green patches clung to existence like he did. It gave him hope. Life meant water had to be somewhere. After more than 72 hours of this endless, relentless wandering, he finally came across an oasis. An oasis with fresh water and raw eggs from a local bird's nest that he could consume. He rushed towards it and began to drink. But due to severe dehydration, his mouth and throat were in so much pain and so severely swollen that it was impossible to even try swallowing liquid. He threw up the first couple of mouthfuls he took. Instead, he laid down beside the puddle for hours, sipping whatever he could using his hand. Little by little, he spent the night sleeping at the oasis. He filled his water bottle with water from that puddle and kept walking. Several more hours went by, and in the mountains Mauro came across a miraculous sight. Goat poop, goat feces. He found something that showed life. Following the trail of animal excrement led him to finding human footprints. Prosperi then noticed a young girl tending to a group of goats. By running towards her and begging her for help, he scared her. The girl ran away screaming and disappeared over a dune. In an interview with Men's Journal in April 2017, Prosperi recalled the situation. "She looked at me aghast, screaming in terror. I beseeched her to stop, but she disappeared over a dune. I must have been a hideous sight, I thought. I took out my signal mirror and turned it towards my face. I was appalled. I was a skeleton. My eyes had sunk so far back into my skull, I couldn't see them. It was a setback, but nothing as hard as wasting your signal flare or burning your backpack for nothing, or surviving killing yourself. So this wasn't going to deter him. He kept walking in the direction the girl was running. He dragged himself closer. The air buzzed in his ears. His breath came in shallow, dry gasps. It was no illusion. Ahead of him stood a small nomadic encampment. A handful of makeshift huts, low to the ground, patched together by the scrap wood, animal hides, and cloth. Goats bleated nearby. A few figures moved slowly between the tents. Mauro summoned the last of his strength. He waved his arms, shouting in a hoarse, broken voice. His legs buckled. The sand rushed up to meet him. Darkness threatened to close over his vision. Before it did, he saw faces leaning over him, brown eyes wide with surprise, hands reaching out, shouting words he couldn't understand. And then, mercifully, the world went black. When Mauro woke, it was not the blinding sun or the choking wind. It was too shady, to voices speaking in a language he couldn't understand, to the rough but unmistakable feeling of care, hands lifting his head, pressing a water skin to his cracked lips, urging him to drink. At first, the water was too much. His stomach, shrunken and fragile, rebelled. But, after cautious sips, his body accepted it, desperate for life. The nomads, Tuareg people of the Sahara, had taken him in without question. They fed him sparingly, offering what little they had: goat's milk, a few dates, scraps of bread. In their tents he rested, swaddled in rough fabric, protected from the relentless desert sun for the first time in what felt like centuries. Mauro tried to speak, tried to explain, but his voice was barely a whisper, and none of them spoke Italian. Still, they understood enough. He was lost, he was dying, he needed help. The next morning, they led him to a caravan heading east, to a small settlement where authorities could be contacted. Mauro rode slumped over on a camel, the rise and the fall of the animal's gait rocking him into a strange, fevered sleep. When he finally reached the military outpost, the officers stared at him in disbelief. An Italian marathon runner, lost in the desert, alone for over a week? They handed him a map and pointed. Mauro blinked at it, struggling to comprehend. He had crossed the border. He was not in Morocco anymore. He was in Algeria, over 290 kilometers from where he had been last seen. Nearly 180 miles, on foot, through the Sahara. It defied reason, it defied survival itself. At the local hospital, doctors swarmed around him. He was suffering from severe dehydration, liver damage, and extreme weight loss. He had dropped nearly 40 pounds in a matter of days. His blood was thick, dangerously concentrated. His kidneys teetered on the edge of failure. But he was alive. He stayed in the hospital for several days, regaining strength. Reporters gathered when the story broke. An athlete who survived one of the deadliest environments on Earth through sheer willpower, instinct, and a refusal to give in. When he finally returned to Italy, to Rome, Mauro was gaunt, hollow-eyed, but smiling. Cinzia and his children clung to him like they might never let go again. In their arms, he allowed himself, for the first time since the storm, to truly weep. He had survived, against every odd, against the desert, against death itself. And now he was home. I lived with death, arm in arm, next to me every day. Death became a friend of mine. It was close to me, was with me, always, every day. I looked to survive, and death kept me company, positively, not even negatively. It gave me the force, the strength to not succumb. Life after the desert was not simple for Mauro. Though his body had healed slowly, the scars left by the Sahara went deeper than the flesh. In the weeks following his return, He struggled with nightmares, visions of endless dunes, choking sandstorms, and the suffocating loneliness of those endless days. Sleep became elusive. Crowds overwhelmed him. Even the simple act of walking through a bustling Roman street could leave him breathless and adrift. Physically, he had to rebuild from the ground up. His muscles had atrophied, and his internal organs needed months, if not years, to recover. There were days when just climbing a flight of stairs felt like scaling a mountain. But Mauro was not the kind of man to be broken. He approached his recovery the same way he had survived the desert, with stubborn, unyielding determination. Mauro returned to training slowly, methodically, building strength, rebuilding endurance. The Marathon des Sables had not defeated him, and it would not define him by tragedy alone. Incredibly, Mauro would eventually return to the race, driven not by vengeance, but by a deep need to reclaim his place in the world that he loved. In 1998, 4 years after his near-death experience, he competed again in the Marathon des Sables. Although he did not win, crossing the finish line was a greater triumph than any medal could symbolize. The media hailed him as a living legend. Survivors, athletes, adventurers, and ordinary people from around the world reached out to him, seeking inspiration, advice, or simply to tell him how his story had touched their lives. Mauro became a symbol of survival, a reminder that the human spirit, even when battered and bloodied, could endure more than anyone dared believe. He gave interviews, he spoke at events, his story was printed in newspapers, documented in survival books, and celebrated as one of the greatest tales of endurance ever recorded. But Mauro himself remained humble. He didn't see himself as a hero. "I am just a man," he would say, "a man who wanted to live." Years later, Mauro and Cinzia moved to a quieter place in Sicily, closer to the rhythms of the earth. Gardens, olive trees, the endless blue of the Mediterranean. He stayed active, competing in shorter endurance events, teaching others about survival, running, and perseverance. Whenever you asked him what saved him out in the Sahara, he would smile quietly and offer the simplest answer: hope, never losing hope. His story endures today not just because he survived the impossible, but because he embodied a truth that every person, somewhere deep inside, understands. Even when everything seems lost, even when the world turns against you, so long as you can summon the strength to take one more step, you are never truly defeated. Mauro Prosperi was not a victim of the desert. He was its defiant, victorious son. And with that, with the story of Mauro Prosperi gone through, with us looking at all the details and pulling them all out of the shadows, let's now bounce from our main story and round out this episode with today's main marks. Number 1. Mauro Prosperi was born on July 13th, 1955 in Rome, Italy. Number 2. In 1974, Mauro joined the Italian police force as a crowd control police officer, and shortly after enlisted in the country's military reserve, serving in the Carabinieri, Italy's national gendarmerie. Number 3. In 1984, French concert promoter Patrick Bauer set out alone across the Sahara, carrying all of his food and his water on his back. Over 12 days, he walked 350 kilometers, over 200 miles, without encountering a single soul, village, or oasis. Inspired by that journey, Bauer organized the first Marathon des Sables in 1986, a race which featured only 23 runners. Number 4. In 1994, a friend of Mauro's described to him an extreme challenge that he thought was perfect for Mauro. It was a race called the Marathon des Sables, a 250-kilometer ultramarathon across the Moroccan Sahara, self-supported, 6 days, temperatures that could cook a man from the inside out. Number 5. Mauro would become lost in the desert due to a sandstorm on the 4th day of the event. Due to its persistence and sense of direction, Mauro would end up 180 miles off course at the end of the 10-day ordeal. He would be required to eat bats, snakes, and insects while also drinking his own urine in order to survive. Number 6. New information. The 2025 Marathon des Sables was run from April 4th to April 14th, is the actual event dates. A man named Rashid El Morabiti won the men's division of the race and claimed his record-breaking 11th win overall at the event. This was also his 10th straight win of the Marathon des Sables. So, motherfucking's been running hard for quite a while now. He won 10 straight Marathon des Sables, has won 11 total now. He is the record holder for the most wins at the Marathon des Sables after winning this year's event just a few weeks ago. And that kind of rounds out our main marks today. We're going to look at one more thing really quick, just a little epilogue kind of type thing before we hop into today's takeaways. The desert remains, endless and merciless. It does not remember the lives it nearly claimed, the bones it has buried, or the dreams it scattered across its dunes. The Sahara simply is, vast, ancient, unchanging. But somewhere, lost within the sea of sand, the faint imprint of Mauro Prosperi's footsteps still linger. Each grain of sand he conquered is a testament to the quiet, ferocious miracle of human endurance, not marked by grand gestures or heroic speeches, but by a simple, stubborn choice repeated over and over. Keep moving. Mauro's story is not just about surviving against impossible odds. It's about the moment when the body says no, the mind says quit, and the soul, battered and near breaking, whispers, "One more step." It is the story of every person who has ever faced a storm, literal or otherwise, and found themselves standing at the edge of surrender. It is proof that survival is not always loud and glorious. Sometimes it is silent. Sometimes it is crawling when you cannot walk. Sometimes it is whispering yes when the world demands you say no. Mauro Prosperi did not emerge from the desert the same man who had entered it. He emerged greater. Not because he was unafraid, but because he had been afraid and kept going anyway. In the grand, merciless scale of the desert, a man is nothing. But in the grand, miraculous scale of the human spirit, even the smallest step can defy death itself. And in the end, it was not the desert that shaped Mauro's legacy. It was Mauro Prosperi who had shaped it. With hope, with heart, and with the undying will to take one more step. Forever forward. We all face deserts in our lives, barren moments when it feels like everything is against us, when giving up seems easier than going on. But maybe Mauro's story reminds us of something more powerful. That sometimes, survival isn't about conquering the world. Sometimes, it's about conquering yourself. And with that, I want to say thank you for listening to the story of resilience, of courage, and of the limitless power of human will. I thank you for being here. I appreciate you checking out the show. It means so much to me. I put a lot of work into these episodes, and though I haven't been as consistent lately with my couple-week break I just took, I want to say thank you for coming and checking out the show. Thank you for being here. Thank you for making it to the end of the episode and, taking the time to leave a rating, leave a review, tell your friends about it, tell someone else about the show. I would love the show to grow, to get bigger, to have more of an audience and more of an engagement. And I appreciate each of you that has taken the time to do that. So thank you so much for being here. I invite you to share the episode, to leave a review, to help spread stories that remind us all of what we're capable of. Remember, you're an awesome person. You're an incredible person. You have a lot of potential. Just like Mauro, you can overcome obstacles anytime that they, show themselves in front of you. And with that, next week, our next episode, not next week, it'll be 2 weeks out. So next episode, we are going to be looking at incredible, crazy, and wild world records that have been set throughout the years. We are going to take a look at those, at some of the crazy people who have done them, and kind of talk about why the fuck would you do some of this stuff. So come back next time and check that out. Until we meet again, keep conquering the challenges you face and keep walking forward. even if it's just one more step out into the light from beneath the shadows.
Wow.